And we are live on this year-end special edition of the ExitStrategy.world webcast. We're joined today by two Americans in Russia, two citizens of Russia as well. Tim Kirby, who needs no introduction for most of our Rogue News audience, and Stanislav Krapivnik, a former U.S. Army officer who's been working with ESW as our Eurasia editor for the last several months. So welcome, gentlemen.
Nice to be here.
Yeah.
Hey.
So we'll start with Tim because so much is going on in the space of, let's say, Western migration to Russia, and you've become a recognized authority on this topic in the country. So we wanted to kind of start with you. What do you see happening in 2025? What are the trends as we're entering a new year in this space?
Okay, so the big thing was the real game changer happened this summer when that law that myself and a lot of other people worked towards was finally turned into a presidential decree that allowed Western foreigners to finally move to Russia without having to be married to a Russian citizen. And that's usually referred to as the shared values visa, which, again, presidential decree only happened this summer. And before that, Westerners had really no right to live here, or at least no right to apply to live here. Now they kind of do. So that's a huge change, and it's a true game changer. So if we're talking about 2025, I can only assume that this policy is going to continue, and there may be some other, let's just say, secondary, tertiary policies coming up that might make things a little bit easier, but there's no guarantees about that. This hurdle was like the main barrier. It was the main thing that really kept Western people from moving to Russia, because essentially if you're already married with kids, and you were the kind of person who might want to live in a more safer, family-friendly kind of country, then you just couldn't come here. You just couldn't. There's no way. And now there is. So that's good. But is something major going to happen? Well, if it is, I'm not involved with it this time. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it, too, from the perspective of, even if, let's say, U.S.-Russia relations somehow, by some miracle, don't further deteriorate. Maybe that's probably the best we can hope for at this point. Tim, you've always dealt with this issue where they never seem to really a lot of people can't make up their minds. Are they coming? Are they not coming? And, time goes on. I mean, we've seen somebody we knew who wanted to migrate to Russia this past year and had private plans to pass away. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening. Yeah. And it seems like sometimes people don't realize time is of the essence wherever you want to be in the world, whether it's Russia or Latin America, that it's better to go too soon, in our opinion, as always, than too late. Okay. Stas, you want to speak to that?
Oh, all right, Stas' turn.
Well, I'll add that there were ways to get into Russia before, but you had to get a sponsor, a work sponsor, or you had to become a student. So it wasn't just and that was mostly for single people. So yes, this helps. Now, having said that, you don't need Russian to get the RVP, the temporary residency, which is 3 years. But you're still going to need to learn Russian to stay after 3 years, because to get the permanent residency and then to get the citizenship, if you so desire to get the citizenship, you still have to pass the Russian exam. It just gives you 3 years in Russia to learn Russian. But if you're working, more likely, depending especially where you're at, you're going to need Russian anyways, at least minimal Russian. If you're outside the big cities, most people don't speak English. Out in the villages, small towns, so you're going to need it, and the kids are going to need it for school. Having said that, right now, the Western media is laughing at the people that are moving, because right now the flow is in the hundreds, starting to edge up toward the thousands. Now there's a huge wave of Russian Germans that have been applying to get their passports, the Russian citizenship back. These are people that moved in the 90s. And there's, I've been told by their representative, who's a former Bundestag member of parliament, by the name of Vladimir Gertz, that there's about 2.5 million people that want to leave Germany and return to Russia. Now, having said that, once those waves start actually cresting, it's not going to be ridicule anymore. It's not going to be laughing at people anymore. It's going to be much more severe, because once the government start realizing that people are leaving and leaving with their money, they're going to start passing laws to make sure, even if you're leaving, you're damn well not leaving with your property. So for those people that are sitting on the fence at the very last minute, and by the way, in some of those governments, let's go back to 1936, 1937. There were a hell of a lot of certain minorities out of a certain government, a set of governments that really waited to the last minute to leave. And they got to leave, all right, except they got to leave in the camps. So that's just something to consider. Yeah, it's better to be at the head of the wave than at the tail that may not get out.
Yeah, and even without the most like worst case scenarios, you're still talking about right now, as you said, the media is sort of ridiculing this trickle of people. It's like a tiny stream of people who are leaving for Russia, mostly for ideological reasons. We haven't had a wave of people coming in for economic reasons yet, but that is coming with the situation in Germany you just alluded to a moment ago, with the deindustrialization of Germany, the energy starvation of German industry, and the fact that Russia, and this is something we'll talk about just very briefly as well, seems to be very quietly and maybe slowly starting to think about in terms of actually being able to poach talent, which is something that obviously Russia's big, burly dragon neighbor to the east has been doing for years. And now Russia is starting to think about it with the German automotive industry. The number of people who are going to be laid off from the machine tools and automotive industries is immense. Go ahead.
Well,
Tim.
at the very first meeting that they had at the State Duma, where they asked people about what we should do, that's the first thing I told them is you got to think like a sports team. This is like almost like an NFL draft. While people are really dissatisfied with the West, now's the time to kind of draft them over here and try to get the best, because unfortunately Western immigration policies lean towards the worst. It's give stuff to the world's lowest bottom denominator for free so they live there, whereas with Russia it's the opposite. If you come here you have to work. That's also one thing people should know. If like, because I even some people, they mess up when they come and live here, and one person even told me, well, I was expecting there to be a really strong sense of community and for people to rally around me and help me. Why did you expect that? In what universe do you live in that people just automatically do you rally around your average guy who's a fentanyl addict in California and try to get him off the needle? So some people do have really bizarre ways of viewing things. But I just wanted to say that about demand is it's kind of surprising how many people don't understand that the dollar right now is very strong to the ruble. If you leave now is a great time to leave. Again, we've talked about my American Village project, AmericanVillages.ru. If you're interested in buying land in a house around Moscow and building a life that way. But regardless, you're going to need to buy a place to live somewhere in Russia at some point. And while the dollar is really strong to the ruble, now would be a great time to transfer your wealth and buy something, because you'll need a place to live in order to immigrate. You can't just be here somewhere and immigrate. It's very critical. And Westerners do not understand this until they meet up with that problem, until that whole permanent registration at a residence problem gets right in their face. And all of a sudden they're like, oh shit, what do I do now? You should have bought a place to live when you had the chance.
That's the Propiska, I believe it's called.
Yeah,
right,
Propiska.
Yeah, permanent registry in a place of residence. Go ahead, Stas.
You can rent a place, of course. It's not rent to own. You can just rent from somebody. A, B, the owner no longer has to register you.
They won't register you. The owners won't. 90% of the landlords won't do it.
You don't have to do. The owner no longer has to register you. You can do it by yourself now. They changed the law.
I've seen people fail at it. I don't know. I'm gonna have to agree to disagree. All right, go on.
Well, they've changed it. I've heard it from several people I've talked to that the owner no longer has to come down with it. But regardless of the fact, you're going to have, Tim's right, you're going to have a place to live. I mean, look, your average American house is selling for about $300,000 on average. So yeah, some places lower, some places more. So if you got even $80,000 in equity, as long as you're not buying in Moscow or St. Petersburg or one of the big cities, or you're buying outside the city, or you're buying one of the smaller cities, or you're buying in one of the towns, $80,000 is about 8 million rubles, which will get you a pretty decent house or a pretty decent apartment, paid for and owned by you. Foreigners are allowed to buy land, and they're allowed to buy, except for agricultural land, and that's
which is a lot of it. Which is a lot of it.
For those that want to be farmers, you've got one of two choices. You either join a partnership or a co-op, and they buy the land, and you share farm off there until you get your citizenship, or you can sign a contract with the government, because the government, there's something like 10 million hectares, which is about 2.5 acres per hectare. So you figure it's about 25 million acres of land that needs an owner. So when it's government land, what the government does is it signs a long-term 49-year contract with a rent to own. And once you get your citizenship, you can buy that land flat out from the government.
Yeah. But that's something that has to be organized. And that's where I come in, because I can buy you through my company that used to do the American Village, any piece of land in Russia, or organize one of those kind of deals for you. Because you're not going to be able to organize that deal just trying to knock on the door of the governor's office of some region of Russia. You know what I mean?
And this is also where Tim's business partner, attorney Timur Beslungarov, comes in as well to assist Westerners who are coming into Russia who have interest in buying, long-term leasehold of farmland with option to purchase once they acquire their Russian citizenship.
That's exactly it. And Timur can work all that out. And another thing why you need services of an immigration lawyer is because the bureaucracy for foreigners is the same as it always was, as in it is in elite level Russian. It is in legalistic Russian. So regardless, if you come here, you basically have to use the services of a migration lawyer in order to file all of your documents properly. Trying to get around that and save $1,500 or $2,000, whatever it costs, is not worth it. You really want to pay for those services to get it done right.
Yeah, and the good news is, I mean, by American legal cost standards, the price is fairly modest. But just understand that you want to get professional guidance on this topic, versus just, it is possible for people to apply for the shared values visa without the services of a migration lawyer if you understand at least some Russian, but it's not necessarily advisable.
A phenomenal level. You would have to speak Russian like the way a foreign person in America who works for a major corporation speaks. Maybe I talk a little bit like this, but everything I say makes sense. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You'd have to be at like his level of being a foreigner in America to do that kind of paperwork on your own.
Yeah. And this kind of brings us to our next point, which is, and by the way, we're going to publish an article at the exitstrategy.world Patreon. I do have to plug the Patreon right now, because there are so many things happening behind the scenes at ESW right now, mainly involving the development of our app, which we announced the kickoff of this past week. We are building the app with a team in Eastern Europe as well as in New York City. And we have started that process, and we're going to be probably moving the articles on the Patreon over at some point to the new domain, eswnews.com. That is eswnews.com, folks, which is, for those of you who know Tim through the Rogue webcast that V the Guerrilla Economist has been doing these last several years, is going to be the new home for all the roguenews.com content you know and love, all the contributors, like Tim's friend and V's mutual friend, Matthew Arrett, and so forth. So essentially what we're going to be doing is combining the two streams of all the roguenews.com content you know and love, plus all the new ESW content from Stanislav here and several other contributors. And it's going to be all available at eswnews.com. And we're going to have some paywalled content that's to be determined based on, what level of membership people are going to sign up for using the app and the website and be able to do it through the desktop. Go ahead, Stas.
And if I can plug this, look, you're going to need Russian regardless, even though you don't need to be able to pass the test. So my wife, I got to plug her. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah,
my wife has 18 years of experience teaching. She's got a teaching degree, and she has 18 years of experience teaching Russian to English speakers, including when we lived in the U.S. So if you need, you don't take. She can work remotely. If you don't take, take me up on this, take somebody else up on this. But do get your at least some basic Russian, because when you go to the store and you want to buy something or you want to do something, or at the bank, chances are there ain't gonna be a lot of English speakers.
Yeah, I mean, you'll be lucky. You may find some English speakers in Moscow, St. Pete, but yes, once you get outside of those two cities, you got to know Russian to survive and be able to do things. And moving to Russia, just as everybody understands, and everybody who's watched Tim Kirby's Rumble channel knows, Unfortunately, Tim lost his YouTube channel recently, but he's still going strong on Rumble, where all Russia-related content is not being censored. We are also, for that reason, moving our content. We've just recently abandoned TikTok. The channel will stay up, but we're not going to be posting new stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
So look for our content on the Rumble channel, where this is streaming live at the moment. And that said, moving to Russia is not for the weak. It's not for people who don't want to work and don't want to work hard at developing themselves. Go ahead,
I was just talking to someone today who's a foreigner in Russia who successfully moved here, and he said that if you're going to be a Western immigrant in Russia, your number one quality you need, in his opinion, is patience.
Yes.
That Russia and moving here requires a lot of patience, and I would also maybe add diligence. So yeah, it's Russia's not going to hold you by the hand at all.
No,
for sure.
Patience. Russians are, I won't say we're so patient as we're just stubborn as hell. So if we're going to do something, we'll do it just out of meanness. We're going to finish it no matter what. And that's the type of mentality you need to bring with you. If you're easily given up or easily stumped, you're going to look. Let's begin with this. If your life is full of problems, moving to Russia is not going to solve your problems.
Correct.
I mean, personal problems. You can't hold a job. You have a drinking problem. You're
bad with women. Yeah, that.
or you're bad with finance. If you're a woman, you're bad with men. That's we're not going into any of the other 150 million genders. That's the matrix too complicated. But if you have these personal issues, moving to a different country. I'm not just saying to Russia. Moving to any other different country isn't going to cure your personal issues. They're going to follow you right to wherever the hell you're going. And it's going to be even more difficult because now you're in a foreign area where you have to adapt. So just consider that. What Russia will give you is an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to raise your children in a safe environment where, for example, gender-affirming healthcare is illegal. So nobody's going to chop your kids' organs up. It's flat out illegal. A lot of these, Russia, for most Western Europeans and Americans, is what the U.S. and Germany were like back in the 80s, early 90s, before it all started to really change. And that's what you hear from a lot of people. So take that with a grain of salt. That's how it is. Just don't think it's going to be a cure-all for all your problems or your dependencies and so on.
Yeah, and
I wanted
to say something about that, Stas, because what the Western media loves to do is they find people who came to Russia with problems or either wildly unrealistic expectations, and they cherry pick them as a horror story, because even though they say that it's just laughable, the number of people that are coming, and they're all, religious zealots or marginal people, or, people who were super pro-Trump, there's at least a couple of, there's one January 6th refugee who didn't do anything on that day, certainly didn't do anything violent, but did an unauthorized Capitol tour, let's say, and is still hoping for his pardon from President Trump, as an acquaintance. And, it's they take the people who have problems and they cherry pick them and they say, oh, it's just like the last Cold War when it was only communists and people who were defectors and traitors who would go over and they'd turn into drunks, in Moscow and in their little KGB provided apartments and stuff like that for among the hardcore deep statist types, let's say. That's their opinion of people who immigrate to Russia. But the reality is that the vast majority of the people who are moving to Russia are really hardworking, talented, for the most part, normal, adjusted, God-fearing people.
Well, yeah. And what
not
you mentioned,
explicitly religious themselves.
And what you mentioned about that sort of like getting drunk in your communist apartment in the 80s, that's because these people are very few. They were sort of political defectors. That's the whole reason why I did the whole American Villages. Again, AmericanVillages.ru if you want to buy a house in Russia or you have some neighbors around who actually speak English. Because for certain people, not me, but for certain people, having a little bit of community and a little bit of people around you who speak the same language can be a big benefit. But once you get over the language hump, if you really want to make friends here, you can play a sport, go to church. That's the thing, is it's really on you to learn the language. After you learn the language to a kind of 4 out of 10 level, if you start going to an Eastern Orthodox church, it's not like people are going to throw you out. You'll be able to make friends. or play any sport. It doesn't matter which one, or some kind of activity. If you hate sports, play Warhammer. Come here and join a Warhammer club. Half the words are going to be in English anyways.
Stas.
Hobby Lobby, is it Hobby Lobby or Hobby? Yeah, Hobby Lobby.
Hobby Lobby's in America. Hobby World is in Russia.
Hobby World. Every Tuesday, most of them, they have Warhammer night. By the way,
there you go, Warhammer night. Yeah.
Is that also where you go if you're into trains, like model trains and stuff?
Yeah.
No, they're more games.
It's mostly games. They've got little model train hobby stores for that. They've actually got a couple of museums of model trains, gigantic model trains that you can come watch them go. I mean, really detailed, gigantic floor plans. But yeah, they so there's gaming there. If you're into that. Look, by the way, if you're easily offended,
this isn't the country to move to. No.
No. Russians are straightforward. Look, nobody's going to tell you. By the way, this is an Americanism. That's not actually an Americanism. The English do it too. Don't ever tell a person, we'll have you over sometime, or we'll go do lunch, unless you're actually planning and you're getting ready to schedule it. Because people expect, if you say that, people expect you to carry that out. There's no empty niceties. Yeah. If you say something, you're expected to carry it out. If you don't, then people are going to look at you like, yeah, that's a person we can't ever trust. So there's none of this smile while you're holding a knife behind your back as you're going to stab the guy in the back the moment he turns around. People tell you what they think about you to your face. If you can't handle honesty, if you can't handle that kind of interaction, again, go to a place where they all smile and backstab each other.
Yeah, and here's the other thing, too, that I've noticed in let's say, pundit commentary about Russia. A hell of a lot of people got triggered when Tucker Carlson came over and went to the grocery store and said, hey, look, the shelves aren't empty like it was in the late, perestroika era. Like there's lots of stuff here and it's nice. And, Moscow's very safe and full of stuff white people like.
The thing is, dude, people shouldn't be angry, because I always tell Russians are like, well, what's the stereotype of Russia? They think that there are bears and balalaikas here. I'm like, no, I think this country's is nothing but a network of death camps. Concentration camp heaven. That's what they think.
Commie block, basically old babushkas and commie blocks and people drinking themselves to death.
Hold on. Yeah. It's critical. It's actually critical, because Tucker Carlson, for a mainstream American audience, said, look, there are stores here. There's capitalism. There's all sorts of stuff you can buy, and no one is starving. That literally was the answer to the true, American stereotype of Russia. If he would have done something else like the way Russians do, and I don't know what went around Moscow and said, look, I don't see any bears here, the way fucking Russians have a retarded view of the way Westerners see their country, that would have done nothing. That would have accomplished nothing. So he did absolutely the correct move. The only thing I think he really botched was, they showed him the metro, but they showed him the Kievskaya metro. And I don't remember him saying something like, there are murals to Ukrainian people in the Moscow metro.
Correct.
And it's called Kievskaya metro. Yep. He didn't seem to really grasp that, or maybe he played it down. I don't know. That was maybe my one disappointment.
Maybe, he didn't. Nobody emphasized to him, hey, we're not sandblasting all the references to Kiev or Bogdan Chmelnytsky or all these figures of the history of the Ukraine, going back to the Cossack times and the wild field times. When it
it's
was
like there are literal mosaics to Ukrainian people in Moscow.
Right.
Right. And
it's not like in Ukraine where they have to destroy everything that's Russian, not even Soviet, but Russian heritage as well. They've got to remove the statues of Catherine the Great or whatever, who freaking founded Odessa, with quite a few non-Slavic foreigners were involved in founding Odessa and Novorossiya.
Yeah, mostly Greeks, as a matter of fact. Most of those were Greeks and some Bulgarians or Slavs.
Italians or Spaniards or I think there was one Spanish retired admiral or somebody who joined the Russian Navy, and obviously there was John Paul Jones in the late 18th century, early 19th century, who was in Russian Empire service. Go ahead, Stas.
Two things I'll add to that. First of all, as a Kazakh, most Kazakhs are Russians. Only the Zaporozhye Kazakhs were what's today considered Ukrainians. Ukrainian, for those that don't understand Russian, Ukraina, Kraina, which is the root of it, means hinterland. So these are hinterlandians.
Or borderland. It's like words of the borderland is what they're shouting. Yeah, when they say
right. So we're hinterlandians. That's the first nation ever called hinterlandian in probably the history of humanity. But having
and
said
krai
that,
is an old Slavic word, right? I mean, they use krai and krajina
krai means edge
as well. Yeah,
it just means edge, like krajina in like krajina in Croatia, where the Serbs lived. So they lived on the edge of the Croatian. Now, having said that, there's two concepts here. When people say Russian, there's Rusichi, which is the nationality, the Slavic Russian nationality, and then there's Russians, which can mean Rusichi, the nationality, or it could just mean everyone who lives in Russia. Who's
Rossiani, I think is the word that is.
Rossiani is most people hate that word, or a lot of people hate that word.
Yeah,
it's a word like the Russian version of Latinx that nobody uses.
There.
Yeah,
it's one of those words. If you speak fluent Russian, you understand the difference. It's like it's a word that was made for Yeltsin. I don't know if it was one of his liberals that came up with it, or maybe the State Department came up with it. It's a new word, and it's it's kind of to nullify Russians as an ethnic group.
Yeah, because even if you're someone from Dagestan and you're actually fighting for Russia now, and you like this country and you're happy Dagestan is a part of it, you're still going to be like Rossianya, fuck that. Like, no one likes it.
Based Caucasian.
And it's not Российская империя, it's Русская империя, Russian Empire. It's again, you have to understand the language enough to feel the difference between those words.
And we should point out, this is another line of, I did want to say this third thing, and this is sort of Tim talks about the sixth column in Russia. This is sort of the Westerner sixth columnist or far right, quote unquote, white nationalist attack on Russia that, basically Russia's this gigantic, Muslim bazaar. Or whatever.
Oh, of course. Oh,
yeah. They say that, Chechnya is basically an emirate within. Yeah, Stas is having some audio issues within Russia, and there's all this, I guess they tried to bash Russia because it's a vast Eurasian country, and it has some actual ethnic diversity. They try to weaponize that. So they sort of adopt this opposite of the woke leftist attack on Russia, that it's sort of this supposed white nationalist country, which is laughable. And then they turn around and turn it 180.
It's a false paradigm because no one ever claimed it to be that. If you even talk to Putin or some of like Russian historians, like Putin will say, I think even one interview is like, there were Muslims here 1,000 years ago, man. What the fuck are we going to do? Even when Russia was way smaller, it's just like these people are always here, and the people who live in their ethnic republics, that's where they're from. They've always been there. What are you going to do about it?
There's northern Eurasians. There's there's a lot of, let's say, an ethnic melange around the Volga River and old Oka River basins that has existed for thousands of years.
Yeah. So if we can bring this back to immigration, let me bring this back.
Stas, go ahead.
Yeah,
your audio is really bad right now.
Oh, is it? It's. I guess it's the internet.
You might want to just turn off your camera and just go audio only.
If it's not bad.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it better?
Much better now. Speak.
Okay. Russians as the Rusichi as an ethnic group are 83% of the population. There's 180 other ethnic groups that call Russia as their historical home. I'm not talking about immigrants like Germans and others. I'm not even counting those. They can add a lot more. Having said that, we've been intermarrying with people. If you're looking for the David Duke moved to Russia during the 90s. Interesting enough, head of one of the heads of the KKK. He got a little disappointed because, look, Russians are marrying Asians. We've been doing that for the last 2,000 years.
And some of the most beautiful Russian women you'll see are Eurasian. I mean, have Eurasian features.
We've never had this national racial how should I put it? Well, we never had these racist tendencies. Our race is a superior race, and everybody else is. When we fought with the barbarians, usually the way the peace was achieved was whatever Khan was going through and just got defeated. He gave his daughter over to whatever Russian prince just defeated him as a wife. That's how peace was handled. And this goes back 1,200 years, so that's never been an issue. That's just never. So if you're looking for a purely white ethnic, go to Argentina. Somewhere in one of those communes.
Yeah, because if you try to, like, I just want to say is for immigrants, if you think that you come to Russia and you're going to live some sort of white nationalist dream, it doesn't work here, because the whole white nationalist sort of thing is a reflection on Western history and especially American history. It's sort of the opposite end of our colorful DEI, wacky-haired, super feminists and all that.
Correct.
Their kind of woke view of history, but the opposite side of it. They're
Right.
both based on these like racial concepts, and like Stas was saying, is because there's been so much intermarriage, intermingling. One of the reasons probably why Russians are such a large ethnicity is because they're sexually expansive or inclusive. Some ethnicities, like the Chechens, are very exclusive when it comes to intermarriage. They don't like it, and that's probably why they're kind of small, and then maybe they're happy that way. Whereas with Russia, it's whoever your father was at least roughly speaking, whoever your father is kind of what you are, which also means that men can go, and whoever you bang is now Russian. You see what I mean?
It's much more patronymic. Yeah, women and men both have patronymic.
Realistically,
they don't have
when you register a child, you can give the child either nationality of the father or the mother. It's historically it's been one thing. Some nations have done another, but realistically, right now, when your child's born, you can write down no nationality, or you can write down the nationality either parent, and assign it that way. It's up to you. It's up to you as a parent.
And
You've got the power.
Where some of like the Islamic muftis in Russia look more like white guys than some guys who I know who are Russian, who look way more like Arabs. So it's also kind of just where the genetics hit and whatever. So I don't know.
Yeah, the redheaded Chechens. Yeah.
Yeah, if Russia was would stop being exposed to a lot of Western propaganda in a lot of ways, which it might be happening because social media is changing here, I think things might revert back to when stuff was more chill or sort of organic or open-ended, like it was in the good old days. So
yeah, and this is also again the other thing too is that you have this sort of the alt-right. Stas mentioned David Duke coming to Russia in the '90s. You had this sort of alt-right, which, as it turned out, was probably a highly astroturf movement, as it were, when Trump came to office, where there were a lot of people who, as it turned out, like were probably, I'm not going to name names, but were probably on the FBI informant payroll, just like many people were on January 6th. And it's funny too, because they sort of get themselves tangled up in World War II revisionism, where it's like, not everything they told us about what Studs Terkel called the good war was, accurate, or maybe firebombing Dresden or Tokyo was not America's finest hour, killing 100,000 civilians. But then they go so far, like the guy Tucker Carlson had on the other day, Daryl Cooper or whatever his name was, Martyr. I think he goes by Martyr Made on X. And maybe Churchill was an SOB, or maybe, World War II didn't have to happen if America hadn't been bamboozled by Wall Street and the British into World War I. But then people take it so far where they start saying things like, well, maybe, the Germans, they start making up this made up quote that George S. Patton supposedly said, where we fought the wrong adversary in 1945 before he died in a car wreck, which it's implied was foul play. And it's like, first of all, we don't even know if Patton actually said that. Second, Patton probably had a hell of a lot more respect for what the Russians accomplished militarily than people quoting him think. And third, it's like people don't make the distinction between the Red Army fighting for Mother Russia and even the fact that Stalin reopened the churches during the war versus, the expansion of Soviet communism into Central Europe, right? It's like people get those two things sort of mixed up. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's a big problem in like contemporary online. I'm speaking about like internet discourse here, which is already kind of messed up because, so much on what you see on the internet, especially social media, is manipulated. Certain people were being pushed up or let's say enhanced. And one of the things I've noticed in the last few weeks is that a lot of what I like to call derogatorily the woke Twitter crowd, or the woke national security crowd on Twitter, has basically decamped to Blue Sky, which if you want to see like all the pure unadulterated woke hatred of all things Russian in almost quasi-racialized terms that people have been stewed in and brainwashed in since Russia supposedly helped Trump get into the White House in 2016. Go to Blue Sky and, start typing in, Russia or mill strategy or search categories like that. It'll be a very enlightening walk through the
I think
fever swamps. Go ahead.
That's more for the audience there. I'm kind of aware of the generic stock criticisms of Russia and Russian society and all that. It's
that's a little bit of a niche thing that I brought up, but I'm just trying to, we're trying to cover the broader categories as possible so the audience understands
but the important thing to understand.
Go ahead, please, Tim.
If I may, because I wrote a dissertation on this when I was first time in university. Dresden, by the way, was the last German city that was bombed by the U.S., firebombed by the U.S. and the British. 5 million Germans were burned alive from 1941 to 1945 by the British and by the U.S. And as far as Tokyo, in one fire raid on Tokyo, it was 500,000 people were killed. And when it comes to Churchill,
more people died in the Tokyo firebombing than in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I believe, combined.
Right.
Correct.
And when it comes to Churchill, the Indians really loved Churchill. He only starved 6 million of them to death, and another 100 million suffered because he stole all the rice and shipped it to England. So the Japanese would probably grab that part of India anyway. So screw them, let them all die. But you're right about the old right.
They were, as I call them, the alt-right, which are kind of stupid.
The old right, They were looking at, Germany's fallen, and now we're going to make Russia into this Nazi state. Not going to happen, just physically.
Well, especially after this war, where Russia's again having to fight a Nazi mentality, and you can see the difference. Where Russia is this sort of great land empire, as it sees itself, which combines a lot of people. Everyone has to speak Russian, and they have to, I guess, pay taxes. But that's about it. And when it's time to band together, we band together. Otherwise, you can kind of go and do our own thing and be a little bit different. So
I would like to tell people, look at the contrast between Mariupol in just 2.5 years and what's happening there. And this was brought up actually by Charles Bausman, and he made a very valid point, which is look at what's happening, the reconstruction of Mariupol, and the fact that, and even what's his name, Arestovich, he's kind of a dissident Ukrainian commentator who's sort of had a falling out with the Zelensky regime. He was very viciously, propagandistic before, and he sort of pretended to have an epiphany, or at least maybe he did have a real one. And he said on a pro-Ukraine webcast, he said, look at the humiliation for us as Ukrainians, that the fact that we claimed that the Russians genocided the Ukrainian population of Mariupol, and yet 100,000 Ukrainians have moved back there who have registration in that city.
A lot of people have done the big loop. They escaped to the West, then went back through Belarus or something to come here and apply for citizenship, to then go back to the other side of the war zone to start living there again. The big loop.
Exactly. And you compare what Russia's done in Mariupol in 2.5 years, when so much of the city was in ruins because the Ukrainian strategy was to try to just, turn it into a mini Stalingrad, versus what Ukraine did in 8 years in the Donbass. They didn't rebuild a damn thing that they showed.
No, because fuck them. And also, dude, when the Ukrainians
they didn't build anything new in the 30 years before that.
It was already crumbling anyway. I mean, nothing really had been built since the Ukrainian independence, since the end of the
When the
Soviet
Ukrainians went into the Kursk, a lot of people were surprised when they were starting to see drone footage of how nice everything is in comparison.
Yeah, I mean, this is not Moscow region. This is not St. Leningrad Oblast or even Krasnodar and Sochi, the region where Sochi is. This is Kursk on the border.
And I can tell you, I was in the Crimea as part of a reality show, an army reality show. I did a terrible job, but it was in the Crimea in 2015. So right after it kind of came over. And everyone I was with who were Russians were like, their minds were blown, because it was like it was locked in a time capsule. Like it was still back in the 80s. Like there wasn't communism, but everything looked as if there was. It was just locked in this eternal 80s sort of nightmare. And if you were to go there now, you will see it is completely, you have to compare it, but it is not locked in this 80s nightmare. Even the roads were weird, and like the way they looked in the Soviet Union. It was absolutely bizarre. But the Ukrainians did nothing with it. Absolutely nothing. As they got it in 1991, when they lost it in 2014, nothing changed.
Yeah, and that's part of, I think, the mindset.
Changed. They stole a lot of stuff and let it run down.
Yeah. And I wanted to say that's part of, I think, the mindset of Zelensky's regime, and it is a wartime dictatorship because his term of office has expired. It expired in May. So just so people who are new to this audience understand that. I'm sure people who have been listening to Rogue with Tim a long time and listening to Stas a long time, they all know this. But Zelensky's, term of office expired in May. The Verkhovna Rada, the parliament's terms, all expired in August. So the whole Ukrainian government is basically running on martial law right now. Like, and they say, well, that's the Constitution says they can run on a martial law. Yeah, sure, but that doesn't make you Abraham freaking Lincoln, suspending habeas corpus and civil liberties and all that to save the Union or whatever. And this is the other thing that I think this is the thing that pisses me off the most about this whole woke mill Twitter crowd is that they've all been shrieking this week about Elon Musk endorsing the Alternative for Germany party. And listen, I'm not saying that there isn't somebody somewhere in the AfD, lower ranks or middle ranks or who knows, who's never made a certain illegal in Germany gesture, or might have some Hugo Boss Halloween costume in their closet. What I'm saying is it's pathetic to me that these people are all shrieking about Musk endorsing AfD Nazis while we've had in-your-face use of SS and of course, insignia and all this Nazi paraphernalia in Ukraine for 8+ years, and they're just like in total denial about it because they're like, well, Zelensky's Jewish, that possibly can't be. Even Azov Battalion had 2 IDF veterans in it, and it's like, who fucking cares? Pardon my language. They're still wearing SS insignia. Even to the point that Congress cut them off, supposedly, for a few years. Go ahead.
That's the level of racism, by the way. To think that Nazism can only be German. Nazism it's fascism with a racial superiority complex built on top of that.
Absolutely.
It says my race is better than your race, and I can do whatever I want with you. That's
Correct.
it. So any race can adopt that. Say, certain people that consider certain people in a strip near a certain waterway to be subhuman, and you can just take out whole apartment buildings with a minute. Not naming any names.
No. So, that's the thing we're dealing with. But the war has really also shown, like in the West, that there are a lot of people who are real, like true NPCs. Like they will just blind their eyes to the fact that the West right now, sadly, is really serving globalist interests. I mean, if you look at the Western mercenaries who are fighting in Ukraine, I mean, these guys are kind of, they're dying for Soros and Gates and the Zionists and all these kind of people. And it's sad, but their hatred of Russia is enough to push them to think that they're doing something good for the West. I don't know. But I just wanted to mention one thing. I've talked to a lot of people from the AfD privately. Their view of Germany is not the rise of a new Reich. It is pure survival. Their country is so screwed, so broken, so trashed that they're like Putin in the 90s. They're just they want to keep the ship afloat. They're not thinking about anything grandiose of that nature. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But if you listen to some of these people, like I've listened to some of these interviews with some of these French mercs and places like that. I'm going to defend Ukraine from communism. Yeah. You don't need to say anything more than that because you already know the IQ level of these people.
I saw one of the Austrian POWs actually first. The West is not sending its best. I mean, a lot of these guys are pretty dumb, or they've got a lot of problems psychologically, mentally, that they're sending as cannon fodder. And even some of these, let's say, so-called ninja, former JSOC guys, I'm not saying all of them are stolen valor or fake valor cases, but what I think happened is that a lot of them were sent to the front, during the Kharkov offensive in late 2022. And what I've noticed is they're sent on these sort of show dog operations where they're kind of in and out. None of them are hanging out on the front longer than 48 hours. They're not sticking around to take, round the clock Russian artillery fire. They're not getting fabs, that are blowing up their buddies. Mm-hmm. They're just sort of in and out as war tourists, as what I call show dog missions, basically.
Well, yeah. Because even, you
can't blame them because they were promised a safari because the Russians are running away. They're weak. They're not shooting back. You get, they're selling their tanks for $10,000 and a bicycle and a bottle of vodka. And come over. You're gonna have a good time. You're gonna run them down. Have fun shooting them. No. Yeah, I think somehow it didn't quite turn out that way.
Well, yeah, like someone even said, I forget who, but it was they said it was sort of like being under a rain of steel, fighting against the Russians. But one thing I just wanted to point out on my channel, which is linked to, the link is below my head here on the window, Tim Kirby, Russia. Anyways, on my channel, I did a video recently, in fact, yesterday, about how the British are now publicizing that they've 15,000 of their soldiers have quit and they're not going to renew their contracts. So like the British Army's shrinking, and it's kind of like weird. Why would in a particularly bad economy 15,000 soldiers quit? Or did 15,000 soldiers get moved to Ukraine? Or did 15,000 soldiers die in Ukraine? Something to think about.
I don't think it's 15,000, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's well north of 150. I mean, in terms of active, I'm talking about active duty Brits. I'm not even talking about the ones who've already long since left the army.
I think in terms of dying, it is normal Ukrainian citizens that have done the absolute majority of the dying part of this. But I think that there are way more foreign Western fighters and other mercenaries than are recorded. I actually think that 15,000, another reason why I talked about that is I think 15,000 even dead Brits could be within the realm of possibility. That seems like, based on kind of my view of talking about this war for the last 3 years or whatever, that seems like the right amount that they're really realistically could be.
I definitely would agree with you that 15,000 body count net for all the NATO militaries is an entirely plausible figure, especially if you're talking about a large number of Poles. I know there's been an expansion of
very possible.
There's been an expansion of Polish military cemeteries in Poland since 2022, very quietly. Yeah. And obviously during the battle, even you go as far back as the Battle of Donetsk Airport, they were finding Polish insignia and certain NATO type sniper rifles in the ruins of the Donetsk airport, the DNR fighters who are mostly almost entirely locals.
Yeah, to be honest, dude, if I was the president of Poland, I'd just fucking invade Lvov right now. While they're distracted, while they've lost all their guys, just take the whole fucking thing. The Polish army could do it. Because I know they've been dreaming of that for generations.
That may be part of the end game scenario that we're moving towards. And by the way, guys, I do have to wrap up. I know you guys have something at the top of this hour that's coming up. So last thoughts on whether Donald Trump is there going to be any type of ceasefire in 2025? Forget on January 20th. Let's just say in the entire year of 2025. If we're looking at our crystal balls and making a prognostication here, based on what you've seen, Tim, in Russia, and what you've seen, Stas, even visiting the Donbass and talking to guys who are been on the front lines for a long time. How do you see this? Do you see any end to this war in 2025, or do you think it's going to drag on well into 2026 or even 2027?
The only end to this war, realistic end to this war, is capitulation. Whoa. It's late. Capitulation by the Ukrainian state, by the Ukrainian army. First of all, there's no one to trust in the West. Sorry, but that's the reality of it. When you have Merkel and Hollande, and if you don't know who those people are, you really need to get educated on the issues. When both of them in 22 came out to the media and said, we fooled Putin, pulled him around by the nose on Minsk 1, Minsk 2, we were only buying time for Ukraine's army to get built up and launch a war on Russia. Not on Donbass, but on Russia. There's absolutely no one to be trusted in the West. And that's the mentality in Russia. B, ceasefire is pointless. For what? Just so they can build up the Ukrainian army again, we can go for round 2 like what happened in Syria? No. This is going to the end. That end may come in different forms, but it's going to be end. And the end is going to be the destruction of the Ukrainian army to the point where it either breaks apart, falls apart, or capitulates. And we'll live and see. So it's not going to end anytime soon. And hopefully NATO won't step into it, because they won't win, but it's going to get uglier, much uglier, especially for the Europeans.
I even would say, Stas, I agree with you that this war probably has at least another couple of years, if not 3, to go on, and before the final bitter end. And I'd even say that a lot of what I've been seeing over the last few months, including all the chest thumping over Assad's downfall in Syria, is some big L for Russia, even though Russia didn't even barely fought and didn't, in the end, chose not to prop up a regime that was crumbling at the last minute, is that it's a kind of psychological defense mechanism that a lot of these guys, these Mill Twitter guys, do, because they don't want to contemplate what would really happen if the United States had to openly, in no longer disavowable numbers, send guys to fight and die over there, because I think some of the smarter ones might actually realize that that's going to be extremely unpopular with a large number of the American people. That a lot of the MAGA people are just fed up with Zelensky. It's not just about him wearing, Fidel Castro Green Goblin fatigues. It's about, and not being able to put on a damn suit and tie. It's more fundamentally, they just don't like, even if they don't know all the details about the Kiev regime persecuting the Orthodox Church and press ganging men and all the other even darker stuff we could talk about that's going on, like the organ trafficking and the human trafficking and things of that nature, and the big pharma, experimentation labs that the general who was assassinated was investigating and reporting on. Kirillov, yeah. I mean, there's just like, Americans are just sick of them already. Like, they see a regime that has this endless sense of entitlement to American taxpayer money and American equipment. And eventually, even though they say that they don't expect Americans to fight for them and die for them, we know that's a lie. They do, in fact, expect NATO soldiers to fight and die for them, because if they didn't, they wouldn't have been so damn profligate with the lives of their own soldiers in battles like Bakhmut and other places where Avdiivka, where they had every option to surrender and to retreat, and they just stubbornly refused to do it. They just kept pumping men into the killing box, just like they're doing now in Kursk Oblast. Go ahead, Tim.
And one thing,
Go ahead. Yeah,
Tim, I'm sorry. Let me say one thing. And as a North Carolinian, I'll tell you this: when people up in the mountains are still sleeping in tents, and it's winter, and the money's going to Zelensky, so it can be so the big guy can get his kickbacks. That's crap.
Yeah. There is no disaster relief because the disaster is Zelensky.
Tim, final thoughts on the home front? Yeah.
If I can just tell you real quick my thoughts again on where the war is going is, I play offensive line, and I can tell you one thing. You never want to give up on the block until someone blows the whistle, because you'd be surprised. You'd think, the ball's going to, I'm blocking to the right. The ball goes to the left. I don't have to hold on. These defensive linemen, they can somehow recover and do something. You have to stay in this guy's face and keep putting the effort in to make sure he does not get anywhere near the ball no matter what happens. And that's kind of what Russia's doing now. They set the block, they hit the guy, he looks out of the play, but if you let him go, who knows? There could be a fumble. The running back could not hit the proper hole. He could run back to the right. You got to make sure this guy is blocked. And that's what they're doing. They're just hitting him and hitting him and hitting them. And even President Putin during this conference sort of, he didn't reference the boxing, but he was kind of like, they're on their back foot. You just got to keep going because you can't allow them to recuperate. So will there be a ceasefire? No, because the Russians refused to do it. And Putin's press conference just confirmed that. So,
there's not going to be any deal in place because it's far from over. It's not to Russia's advantage at all to try to agree to a ceasefire in the current.
Because any ceasefire-based deal means Russia loses. They don't get the demilitarization and the denazification. That was the whole point of fighting this. So that's a loss. Yep. There you go.
Yeah, and I still think we're going to see some attempts to push Trump to basically say, well, you tried, but Putin's intransited it, so now it's time to send the South Korean troops or do some other unforeseen escalation type thing, or even start attacking the Russian tankers that are far from the SMO zone. So that's where I see some things going. Yeah.
Sending the South Koreans might actually be more effective than sending some of the questionable people that they've snuck into the U.S. Army over the years. Because when I graduated high school, this was a while ago. I'm an old fart. 20 people went into the military, 19 overweight girls of 20. So who knows when push comes to shove, if you take the Marines out of the picture, I don't think it's going to go very well. If you have the Marines fight, maybe, but there's only how many? 50,000 of them? 100,000?
Exactly. And I like to say it's not even about borrowing or stealing valor at this point. It's almost like a synthetic CDO valor. Like all these Twitter guys, they high five over dead Russians and talk about how backward the Russian military is and how badass and tough the Ukrainians are. And it's like, yeah, but the Ukrainians are running out of men. Like, at what point do you think somebody, or at least somebody in our military is going to have to go over there if we don't get a peace deal in place and fight? That Americans are actually going to have to fight because you're running out of Ukrainian men to hide behind their backs, and brag about how tough you are. So that's my final thought, is that Yeah, I unfortunately I wish I could give our audience a more optimistic picture and say that, you know, Putin and Trump are going to shake hands in Istanbul or Dubai someplace at a summit and hug this out and figure out how to make peace on earth prevail in Ukraine. But unfortunately, I think it's going to go on for at least another 2 to 3 more years until Ukraine's manpower potential is basically exhausted and they're drafting 16-year-olds and women.
But you also have to remember, if you look at like a chart where they show how much territory the Russians have gained by month or by year, you can see that's kind of almost going upwards and upwards, kind of like what would that be? Exponential growth.
Yeah.
So in terms of talking about years, 2025, if the growth continues at that rate, well, there's not going to be that much of Ukraine left by the end of 2025.
Yeah, and it's similar to, you know, people try to measure this war in terms of territory, and I say that's always flawed because it's very similar. People forget that the German army was occupying a huge chunk of France when it collapsed and surrendered in November 1918, and similarly, the Nazis, you know, when the Allies were advancing up the Italian boot in 1944 after they landed at Anzio and then they came up through Rome. You know, they were propagandizing the U.S. soldiers, dropping leaflets on them saying, well, at the current pace of your advance, you won't get to Berlin until 1960. And it's like, well, you know, it's like bankruptcy, you know, collapse in a war of attrition is just like bankruptcy. It starts very slowly and then suddenly all at once.
Well, yeah. So, all right. Well, anyways, gents, I think it's time for us to hit the road.
Yes. It's getting late.
All right, guys, it's been a pleasure to have you both on. Stas, keep up the great work with the articles, and we're going to be publishing more of yours in 2025. And Tim, we'll be talking to you again very soon about American Villages and Kuga Real Estate and other projects. So awesome show, guys. Thank you very much.
Bring on the real estate questions.
Merry American Christmas and s Novim Godom, Nastupajshim Novi God to you. All right.
Absolutely.
All right, goodbye.
Cheers.
Now.